This week on the 77% Street Debate.
We used to be forced to speak English. While we came from background of speaking Swahili, we have been raised in Swahili.
But do you lose your identity simply by learning another language?
When I speak English, I try to dress like an English person, acting like an English person. It means I have to leave all my cultures behind.
Maarifa, elimu, chochote ulichonacho ifunze kwa lugha unayoifahamu.
Hello and welcome back to the 77%. This week we are in one of my favorite cities in Africa, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Now, did you know that there are over 100 languages spoken here, and yet Swahili remains a national language? In fact, Tanzania, until recently, was only one of only 2 countries in Africa to have that. And so today we are asking, why is it that we choose these imposed languages when we have so many to choose from? Who better to ask that than some fellow Tanzanians? And I just want to start with a general question, right? Oh, and by the way, I know we're having this conversation in English, which is the entire point of this debate. So just by show of hands, how many of you speak more than 2 languages? At least 2 or more languages? That's almost everyone on the panel. Who speaks at least 3 languages? At least 3, wow, at least 4? Okay, so let's start with you then, Osman, who is a student here in Tanzania. He's actually from Ghana, so Akwaba. So what languages do you speak?
So I speak English, now Kiswahili. I also speak Akan or Chi. Then I also speak Hausa.
You also speak Hausa. Yes. So 4 languages. So how many languages do you speak?
2 languages.
Which ones are they?
Swahili and English.
Okay, so is it normal for most Tanzanians to be speaking at least more than 2 languages?
I can't speak for all Tanzanians, but I think, yeah, it's usually the standard. 2 is usually the standard, but most often it's 1, Swahili.
Okay. So when we think Tanzania, normally the first thing that comes to mind is, yes, the beauty, but also the use of the Swahili language. Can you tell me how it became so prevalent in this country?
Historically, I think it's due to just the history of Swahili. The coast has been the place to bring people together, Persians, Arabs, the Europeans. So Swahili was literally the language that brought these people together. So you'd have an Arab who speaks Arabic, a Persian speaks Persian, who can speak to the locals. So they had to form a language that everyone would understand. And that's how Swahili was born, which is why some of the phrases, some words in Swahili mimic Arabic or are kind of like in Arabic. And so over the years, it's kind of built up that way. So even tribal wise, you'd have, as a Bantu language, you'd have some phrases in this tribe also mimicking some phrases in Swahili.
So obviously it took concerted effort, not just by the politicians, but also the people of Tanzania to speak Swahili, right? But obviously this has also brought some challenges, Philemon, because while many people do speak Swahili, they're not entirely able to communicate with the rest of the globe, right?
Sure. Yes, most of the people in Tanzania that speak Swahili from their background, from their originals, but for people who are lucky, maybe going to school, whereby they got opportunity to learn English in the other language.
Okay, so talk to me a little bit about how it is in Tanzania. Evelyn, let me speak to you because you're a teacher at a private school. The language of instruction is ideally supposed to be Kiswahili until you get to secondary school, am I right?
Actually, there are 2 options. So in the private sector, that is where English is mostly spoken as the medium of communication. While in the government school, Swahili is mostly spoken as the medium of communication. So that gives a chance for most Tanzanians to keep learning the language and get used to it and they grow with it. But when they when they get to secondary schools, that is when they start using one language, and that is English as the medium of communication.
Isn't this difficult though? I mean, to have that super hard transition? Zipporah, tell me about your experience.
It's really difficult because, when a child is speaking mother language as Swahili, and then you've been introduced another language in English, it's really hard for students to cope up with 2 languages. Yeah, so it's really hard.
Right. So I'd like now to ask a question to someone who has a PhD or is doing a PhD in Swahili. Yeah.
Let me talk something. We have languages. I want to say languages, a lot of languages, Swahili, French, any kind of languages. And we are instructed to learn a lot of languages as much as we can. But when you come to the language of instruction, for my opinion, I think we should instruct and we should teach students to using the language which they know. And for my side, here in Tanzania, I think it's better to use Swahili. Why Swahili? Because it's known to the students, it's known to the pupils, it's known at least, most I can say, to everybody. So teaching using any kind of language, it means you should start, also lose a lot of energy. And I'm telling you, it's really, a lot of students do fail. And I'm telling even teachers, they know, most of teachers don't know.
Evan, I'm coming to you because you're raising your hand. There are also, like I said, over 100 languages spoken in this country. So what's the place of those quote-unquote mother tongues?
Actually, the mother tongues are basically used in tribes, okay? And therefore, Swahili happens to be the main language that is spoken in this country. And for that reason, it unites us. It brings us together as Tanzanians, and that is why it is widely spoken in this country.
Yeah.
I also wanted to speak about the transition from the primary level to secondary level. Usually, there's some hardship during the first 2 years because the kid or the pupil has to try to transform him or herself in language for the first 2 years so that they can cope up with the education and all that, okay? But after some 2 years, they usually are on the same level because they start speaking and even control themselves in education based on the English language.
Okay, Mariam.
I work in publishing, so we see a lot of people who are not big readers. So you have someone who's graduated from college who rarely reads per year. And this is almost always attributed to the fact that they've only had to learn English in secondary school, or they only have had to learn Swahili in maybe only primary, and then they have to abandon it.
So, by the way, before we get too far, I just want to tell our audience that there's been numerous studies that have been done which support the fact that early childhood learning is actually better if done in a medium of instruction that the child understands. Let me hear from you.
As most of African countries and these people are trying to get interacted with the external world, but language become barrier. So in order to enforce that interaction, we are being forced to learn external language, let's say English language. So as if someone came from maybe either Nigeria or South Africa for business, tourism, or other factors, we can interact easily.
Okay. So, Dorina, this is a really interesting point he's brought up, which is where the hierarchy of languages, right? So he said that when it comes to business at home, speaking to your people, hapa na pale, you use Kiswahili. But when it comes to business, English is a preferred language. Why? And Swahili is also an official language.
In most cases, we abandon our language, Kiswahili. When searching for jobs, searching for the opportunities, you must know English. You also speak Swahili as part of your national language, but it doesn't actually help you to move to the higher levels when you are searching for different opportunities. And that's why, as Mariam said there, when we move from the primary level, we do abandon our language.
Okay, so we're talking about abandoning the language, and yet there are people who are paying top dollar to learn the language. Lillian here is from Zimbabwe, and she's doing her master's in Swahili. So what got you thinking, this is a language I want to use, even as the Tanzanians themselves say, perhaps it's not the best language to be learning at the moment?
Well, say for me, I saw that Kiswahili is getting more opportunities from my own country. Let me just say that I'm the 5th Zimbabwean to study masters in Kiswahili. So
the 5th?
Yes.
There's like a tally. Wow. Okay, congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So I've seen that this language is going to it's going to open opportunities for me. Because like now, Zimbabweans who are starting to learn at the university level, especially at the University of Zimbabwe, they are being forced to learn Kiswahili as one of their languages which they learn. So I've seen that, why would I learn Chinese? There are Chinese here teaching. There are Germans here teaching. Why would I go for those languages whilst you don't have anyone who is teaching that language? So I just opted to go for Kiswahili, which is also an African language.
Yeah. That's an interesting word you've used, forced to learn Swahili. Do you think that we are forcing other Africans to use their national, their native languages, their African languages?
Swahili has always been lingua Africa. You know, it links people together. I think what's happening right now, even with Swahili being the main language in the AU and in the EAC, it's that we understand that it links people. It's more than a language, it's a culture. So being African, people relate to Swahili speakers because you relate to the culture in of itself. It's not just the language.
Yeah.
So,
But Mariam, are we really being honest with ourselves? Yeah. If I'm to speak honestly as a Kenyan, Kenyans really want to make fun of Tanzanians because of your proficiency of Swahili. I mean, of English. Have we internalized the self-hate so that we judge people based on their ability to speak a borrowed language? Let me hear some thoughts. Zipporah.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I wanted to say in Tanzania, when you speak English, it's when people look at you like you are intelligent. And when you speak Swahili, or when you can't speak English, they will look at you like, Mjinga. How is Mjinga in English?
Foolish.
Foolish. Yeah. Like you're a fool because you don't know English. So it's really, I don't really get it because we take speaking English as being intelligent. Well, while it's a language, everybody can just, you can learn any language and you can be good at it. Doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Lillian.
Okay, I wanted to point out on the hierarchy of language. Actually, in Zimbabwe, it's kind of different. We actually have hierarchy of language. We have English on top, then we have Shona, then we have Ndebele. So now, like, English is being on top. Why? Because it's the medium of communication, like for the whole country. We don't have like a national language, which is our own language. We only use English as the medium of communication. So if you meet with someone from another ethnic group, and if that person can't speak English, you can't communicate.
Wow.
Yeah, you can't communicate. So we actually have that hierarchy of language.
But give me a second to just come to Evelyn. I've read that teachers are sometimes horrible to students who don't speak Swahili, who employ fear and shame as a tool to try and encourage them to learn. Is this true?
It is. You see, what happens is, as my friend said here, that English is being termed as the measure of intelligence, you see? And not speaking English, you seem like you're unuseful, okay? And that becomes a very big problem. It discourages the learners, okay? And my advice to the government, I think, since they decided to have these two sections, that we have the public schools and private schools, I think we should also continue like that on the secondary level, because that will give an option to the children who started with the Swahili language to keep on using it, and perhaps they will do it better. Yes.
Zipporah, I saw you really shaking your head when I asked about this shame question. Oh God, did you have an experience like that?
In secondary, I remember when we were at school, there was a rule to speak English. And if you don't speak English throughout the day, there are punishments and everything. So, no more punishment like, viboko, sticks, yeah, a couple sticks. You get a couple sticks, punishments here and there. So we had really to cope using English, to try not to speak Swahili at all for a whole day from morning till evening. Maybe later on in the bweni, in the dormitory, that's where you speak Swahili a little. Yeah.
But I mean, this must not be good psychologically for anyone who's trying to learn a language, right? Let me hear from you, please.
We used to be forced to speak English, yeah. While we came from background of speaking Swahili, we have been raised in Swahili. So you reach in secondary school and find yourself that you really need to speak English as your first language. So we are getting confusion at the end of the day, because the teachers, the school, they haven't explained what are the importance of a student to speak this English, but they are forcing you. At the end of the day, you have to speak English from morning to the evening. Then you find yourself, you are hungry, you are tired, and you're ending up hating these things called English.
So I really like what you've said about it even makes you, sort of don't want to learn English to a certain degree, yeah? But when we drop Swahili, as you say, or when we don't see it as valuable, what do we lose as a society? When you don't sing in Swahili, or if you don't write in Swahili, what do we lose as a culture?
We lose our stories. Growing up, as Tanzanians, historically, stories are being passed down to us by oral tradition. So like we have grandfathers, grandmothers telling us stories in Swahili. But then you have someone who now has to abandon home to go to school, where they're no longer being told those stories in Swahili. They're no longer reading it in Swahili. They're no longer writing it in Swahili. You lose your identity. I was actually thinking while this discussion is going on, there's a sort of like a cultural erasure that's happening where people forget who they are. So you find yourself unable, I'm actually a victim of that, unable to relate and connect with your own language. So that loss of identity comes across as, we call it sophisticated because you learn English, you're able to communicate internationally, but really it's a loss of self and the identity of who you are as a person.
And really, she said a very big thing, because someone said here, there are most students who are not really passing very good because of the language barrier. And then we don't get a lot of people that are professional in many areas, like in industries, in the movie industry and everything. So you find that we have to get another people to come over to do our stories, to write our books, to make our film, to do everything for us. That's where she says we are losing our own stories. Like, who will write our stories if you can't speak for yourself, and because you don't have a language of your own?
From you, Lillian?
Okay, like what they are saying, it's very true that like leaving your language aside and learning this language, it makes you lose your identity. Why am I saying that? Like in Zimbabwe, I think you're only left with like 2 cultural things which I, for example, the Lobola thing, marrying. Yes, we still do that. And the burying of the dead. Those are the 2 cultural things which I know. But other things which they were doing, like, it's lost. Like, we don't know anything about that.
But do you lose your identity simply by learning another language, or is it because I speak multiple languages, right? I have not stopped being a Kikuyu or a Kenyan or an African.
Well, the problem is that when you learn a language, you now try to act like the people who talk that language. That's where the problem comes. So when I speak English, I try to dress like an English person, acting like an English person. It means I have to leave all my cultures behind and act like the ones I'm learning about.
Right. So let me ask Osman then, when you started learning Swahili, did you find yourself making decisions that were different from, say, perhaps if you're speaking Akan?
Not necessarily.
By the way, when you dream, what
Yes. I think I dream in Swahili now.
You dream?
Dream in Swahili now, because now even speaking Akan or Hausa, I kind of mix Swahili with when I'm speaking with my parents. I'm used to the Swahili now.
Let me ask Dorina here, because we're now looking at the 4th Industrial Revolution. Everybody is in the digital space, and Swahili is fairly well represented, but not enough, right? Are we losing out on perhaps making leaps and bounds in that sector because we're just not speaking our own language?
We need to localize the digital tools. We need to localize the content so that they can be accessible in Swahili language. And in this way, we can be able to preserve our language and to make sure that the next generations comes and find our language intact.
I would say that remaining as a part of speaking our local language will just make technology to follow us, because technology demand market. For speaking maybe artificial intelligence, if we decide Tanzanians, our standard language is Swahili, and the tools are made maybe for business purpose, they will just transform those technology to meet our language demand. So the fact that we are transforming from other native languages, we are being forced to adapt technology rather than technology to adapt us.
I totally get your point. And with 200 million speakers of Swahili on the continent, surely it should be adapted, yeah? So I totally get your point. So back to you. Creating in your mother's tongue in Swahili, how does that compare to when you perhaps sing, write in English? She's an artist, by the way, Zipporah.
So it's really easy when you sing, or when you're producing, or when you're acting in your mother language, because you're being yourself. You're living under your own skin. So it's so fun. Kwa mfano mimi ni mwimbaji, and kuna wakati wanaitwa kwenye sehemu kuimba, and kuna wakati unaambiwa labda imba nyimbo fulani kwa Kiingereza na kwa Kiswahili. So ukiwa unaimba kwa Kiswahili it's so fun. Ni rahisi, unajielezea, una-enjoy the music. Lakini ukiimba kwa Kiingereza kuna wakati unasahau maneno, unayatamka sivyo. Kwa hata yule mwenye language yake ikiwa pale anaona like haina test nzuri. Kwa ni rahisi sana ukiwa mwimbaji, ukiwa mwigizaji, ukiwa na actress or singer, ukifanya kwa lugha yako.
Okay, I like that. So we need to preserve the languages because it helps us tell our stories. One more point?
Doing anything by using the language which you are being forced, you cannot be free.
Yeah.
That's the problem here in Tanzania.
So you think we're not free as a people because we speak these borrowed languages?
No, we're not. We are not saying being free. It depends whom you are talking with. For instance, myself, I'm not free using English. I'm not free, but I'm forced to do. Maybe I can do.
Basi jieleze kwa Kiswahili.
Kwa hiyo nakuelekeza maarifa, elimu, chochote ulichonacho jifunze kwa lugha unayoifahamu. Ukishajifunza kwa lugha unayoifahamu, baada ya hapo jifunze lugha nyingi uwezavyo. Kiingereza, Kifaransa, Kichina, Kijapani, jifunze. Baada ya hapo ukishajifunza lugha hizo utakazojifunza, unaweza kutoa maarifa uliyojifunza kwa lugha uliyokuwa unaifahamu, ukatoa maarifa vyovyote uwezavyo, Kichina, Kijapani, lakini huna maarifa. Hiyo ndio kinachokufa sasa hivi. Hatupati maarifa kwa sababu ya Kiingereza, kwa sababu ya kizuizi cha lugha. Kwa hiyo hatupati maarifa. Lakini kingine ambalo ni tatizo kabisa, kuna walimu wengi ambao sio wenye lugha zao wanafundisha. Walimu wa geography, walimu wa physics, walimu wa mathematics wanakuwa forced kufundisha Kiingereza na lugha nyingine zifunzwe na walimu. Which kind of subject are you teaching? Are you teaching English? Are you teaching English? But the mathematical teachers...
Please don't harass our panelists.
The mathematical teachers are using English. They're teaching English. Yeah. That's the problem.
I really love the passion that you're speaking here about. But I think we need some practical steps, yeah? I think in an ideal world, we would all be speaking our mother tongues, perhaps a lingua franca, which is an African language, and then English. But that's not the reality today. So how do we shift this thinking? How do we get more people interested in African languages, more people speaking them, writing in them, singing in them, doing debates in them? Let's hear some ideas.
So I think on my side, I would do more of localizing the digital tools and the digital content into our language, into Swahili. And this is the very best way to preserve this language. It is the very best way for people to learn in the digital spaces.
Okay, you had another point for me?
We should build our psychology that the language we have are the best. And whatever we are doing, as my friend said there, we should emphasize using our local language. So from there, when we transform them to the other world, we move them with our originality, with our traditions, with our cultures. So whatever we are doing, we do it with the base of our local language.
Okay, I like that. Some more ideas? Yeah, let's hear from you at the back. Philemon, I see your hand, I'll come.
When we're talking about Swahili, we are not only losing Swahili, but we're also losing our native languages. For now, we have 8 native languages here in Tanzania that they are dying. For example, Kami language. Not most of us know the Kami language. It is from the Eastern Bantu people. In Africa, the first language to be spoken is Swahili. It is spoken by 15 countries. And not only in the Eastern Africa, but also in the Western Africa and the Central Africa. There's some countries speaking Swahili. And we have to promote Swahili at a level that all of the African countries have to speak Swahili. It is the first language to be spoken here in Africa. South Africa, they are teaching Swahili in school.
Yeah, they recently adopted that. Philemon, let me hear from you. Final thoughts. How do we preserve this language, these languages?
Okay, so I think these 3 organs, government, education institutions, and technological companies, they should work together. Government should make their priorities in making Swahili as our main language, but also access of opportunities. But also technological companies, they should have the different access in producing their device or product, like apps. They should have also put in Swahili as a part of learning on those apps. Also, we have a lot of innovators. We have a lot of creative person in Tanzania. They have ideas, or maybe they have designs already. But where to preserve those, where to present those ideas, because you have to be in English. Even the innovation challenge, we saw a lot of innovation challenge. They are in English. So I can have innovators, but I don't know how to present my ideas. So the government, the education institution, and technological company, they should work together in promoting our African language.
Okay, let me get the last 2 points, please. One from you, and Mariam will finish.
Let us agree that
the good promoters of Kiswahili are us. So let us drop the ideas that when you speak English, you'll be looking like you are intelligent and wealth and everything. Let us stand and promote our Kiswahili.
Kiswahili tukubali Kiswahili kinatufiti, si Waswahili na Waafrika. Let us use it tuwafundishe watoto. Let us teach our children. Let us teach our community so that we can promote more of Kiswahili huko nje. Thank you so much.
Okay, sawa. Mariam, tumalize na wewe tafadhali.
In addition to everything else that was just said, I think another thing we need to do is also change our mindsets on what we assume would be quote unquote commercial. Because I think that when the world, if you give the world permission to show you that you're not quote unquote commercial, the world will show you that. If we are adamant to make content, to create books, to present our stories in a language that preserves who we are as a people, the world will make room for that. We just need to do it first. So all of us have a collective responsibility to promote the languages that feel the most realist to us. And also we have the world will make room for that if we do it.
I like that. And I think that's a great place to wrap this debate. We started with a simple question. How do we change this narrative? I think you've given us a really good answer, because preserving languages is preserving ourselves, who we are as Africans. Asanteni sana kwa kututazama.